Resourceful Designer, episode 86, Handling Criticism.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He loves extra old cheese, Mark DeCote.
Welcome to the podcast. I do appreciate you tuning in as I discuss a topic that all designers have to face at one time or another, or at multiple times more likely, which is criticism. Now, before I get to today's topic, I want to share a little bit with you. First of all, I just came back from a wonderful podcasting conference called Podcast Movement, which was held this year in Anaheim, California. Now, I learned some great things about podcasting, met some wonderful people, discovered some great resources. But one of the highlights of the week was my luncheon that I had with both Barbie and Nicole. We went out and had lunch and discussed all our graphic design business and different things about marketing our business and dealing with clients. And it was just overall, it was a great time. And just that luncheon alone was worth the trip to California, in my opinion. Not to mention, it's the first time I ever was face to face with somebody who actually listens to the podcast. So that was a big treat for myself. So Barbie and Nicole, thanks for the great time. But now I'm back at home. And I was going to say back in the office. I'm back in the office recording this podcast right now, but technically I'm still on holidays this week. My wife was off for 2 weeks, the 1 week I was away, and this week as we're preparing our daughter, who will be moving away to go to college just this coming weekend. So I decided it wasn't worth me getting down and working, and I double checked when I got back to make sure that there was nothing pressing and none of my client stuff was on a tight deadline or anything like that. So I'm putting it off till next week when I will be back at work full swing. So that's what I've been up to. Now, before I go any further, I just want to remind you that any links that I mention in this episode can be found in the show notes page by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 86. So if there's something I mention and you're on the go and you can't really copy something down or take a note of it, don't worry. You can always visit the show notes page and any links or anything I mention can be found there. Speaking of links, it's time for this week's Resource of the Week. And this week's resource is one that I have shared before, and that is Backblaze, a cloud backup service. Now, the reason I want to mention Backblaze this week is in case you are a customer of CrashPlan, which is another cloud backup service. Well, CrashPlan has announced that they will no longer be providing consumer backup services. So if you are currently using CrashPlan as your backup service, you will need to find an alternative. And that's why I recommend Backblaze. I've been using them for several years now, and it is so easy to set up. And it's one of those services that you set it up and you forget about it. Backblaze works in the background. It backs up everything on your computer, unless there's certain parts of your computer you don't want backed up, and then you just tell it so. And it's not backed up on site. It's in the cloud, so that if by any chance something happens and you lose your system, you don't lose all your files and everything. It is just peace of mind. We are running a business after all. If this was a personal computer and you lose some things, okay, no big deal. But this is your business. You can't afford to lose what's on your computer. Not to mention it for personal stuff. If you have all the photos of your kids growing up or your vacation with your family or your parents that maybe are no longer with you, you don't want to lose all that stuff. So cloud backup service is a great thing to use. And for $50 a year, it's well worth the investment. Just think, at the time I'm recording this, Hurricane Harvey has just hit the southern United States. Texas was hit very hard. The photos are just incredible to look at. The devastation, water up to the roof lines. Well, if you are a designer in that area and your computer was there, it's now underwater. There's a good chance you're not going to be able to recover that computer or anything that's on it. As I said, Backblaze, I've mentioned it before, it is the perfect solution for an off-site backup for your business. Whether it's a natural disaster like the hurricane and flooding, or somebody breaking in and stealing your computer and your hard drives, whatever it is, the peace of mind of knowing you have your whole business, and your personal life for that matter, backed up and easily retrievable, is well worth the price of $50 per year. So if you want to check out Backblaze, especially if you are currently a Crash Plan user, then please use my affiliate link at resourcefuldesigner.com/Backblaze. You won't regret it. And now, handling criticism. There is a huge debate in the design world that's been going on for practically forever, and it will probably never end. And that debate is whether someone who is a designer should have gone to school or not. There are some extremely talented designers out there that never took any sort of art or design class. And there's also some graduate designers that did complete some sort of course that, in all honesty, don't have that much talent, but they made it through. And that's what causes this debate. Now, regardless of your background, whether you learned on your own or you went to school, whatever it is, eventually your work will be criticized by your peers, by your clients, by whoever. And how you deal with that criticism will go a long way in further developing yourself as a designer. Not to mention, it goes a long way in building those relationships that I'm always talking about, those relationships with your clients. If you can accept criticism from a client in a positive way, then you strengthen that relationship that you're building with them. Now, one of the advantages of going to school, and as far as that debate goes, I am an advocate that designers should go to school. And for one of the main reasons is to learn to take criticism, especially taking criticism constructively. I remember back in design school, when we would finish a project, we would one by one go up in front of the class, present what we had done, and then most of the time, have it torn apart by our fellow classmates or teachers or the dean or whoever was there. And I remember lots of time thinking, wow, I just designed the most amazing thing in the world. They're not going to be able to find anything wrong with it. Well, trust me, there's always somebody that can find something wrong with it. If you're a member of the Resourceful Designer Facebook group, which you can join by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/group, you will know that from time to time, I will post a random logo in there. I just go into Google, type in some random industry, pick out a logo and post it in the group and ask people what they like and what they dislike about it. Well, I can tell you that 95% of the comments are criticism, stuff that's found wrong. Very few of the comments talk about what's good with the logo, what they like with the logo. There's always something that people find wrong. And that's just the nature of humans in general. We tend to look for things to criticize. Not that we want to be mean, but sometimes it's just a matter of wanting something to be improved or thinking another way. But design is subjective. Everybody sees it differently. When we are looking at a logo in the Facebook group and people are criticizing it or finding flaws or suggesting ways they would have improved it, at the other end, whoever designed that logo, although I got to admit, some of the ones I chose were pretty bad, but most of the time, whoever designed those logos probably thought the logo was fine. And the client that it was designed for was happy with it. But as I said, design is subjective. So there will always be somebody who doesn't like it. And that goes for every single logo out there. It doesn't matter. The Nike swoosh, which people are saying is an amazing marketing tool for Nike. There are people out there that think that's awful. You know, somebody in 5th grade could have come up with that design. And you know what? It's possible they could have. But the way it's being implemented is what's making it such an iconic brand. The FedEx logo. It's another logo that so many people talk about being the pinnacle of design. The way the negative space forms the arrow that once seen cannot be unseen. And as a designer, I love pointing that logo out to people because there's so many people out there that don't see it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google up FedEx logo, take a look at the logo, and look for the white arrow that is formed by the negative space of the letters. Once you see it, you'll never be able to look at that logo again and not see that arrow. It was brilliantly constructed. And yet, there are people out there that think the logo is too simple. Or the colors, I don't like the colors. Or the font, it could have been better chosen. No matter how good you think the logo is or the design is, it doesn't have to be a logo. It could be a website, it could be a brochure, it could be a business card, a poster, whatever. no matter how good you think it is, there will always be somebody who can find fault with it. And that's because we all have blind spots that we can't see. We don't see our faults. It takes somebody else to point them out. And that's how you do become a better designer. The reason back in school, when we would present our projects in front of the class and they would criticize it, was not to put us down or to deflate us. It was to make us better designers. So we would see other people's point of views. We would see other options that maybe we hadn't looked at. When you start working on a project and you go in a certain direction, it's very hard sometimes to see what other directions you can take with that project unless somebody points it out. And there are times, I know myself, I've designed something and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. And somebody will look at it and they would go, what if you did this? And I would go, wow, I never thought of that. I don't think I ever would have thought of that. But what a brilliant idea. I tweak my design a little bit and it makes it that much better. Sometimes it takes other people to point those things out, and that's comes from criticism. So the type of person you are and how you handle that criticism, as I mentioned earlier, is what will make you grow as a designer. When somebody tells you that something doesn't look right or you should do it this way, if you listen and you learn from that, I'm not saying you have to follow what they're saying, but if you learn from that, like that's an option, you grow as a designer. And maybe the next time you're doing something similar, that idea might come back to you and you might try going off in that direction. You might decide to take the left path as opposed to the right path. Because whatever we're designing, we aim for perfection. We want to give the perfect logo to a client, the perfect poster to a client, the perfect postcard, website, whatever. We are aiming to give the perfect design to the client. But perfection is unattainable. Nothing will ever be perfect. There will always be room for improvement. I've mentioned before in this podcast how I'm not an artist. I consider myself a designer. I'm not an artist. I can't take pencil and I can, but I don't draw well. I'm not a good painter. I can copy. If you give me something and you want me to make a copy of it, I can do that. I can take a pencil and copy something and it looks pretty good. I can take paint and copy another painting. It won't look as good as the original, but I can do a fair job. But give me a blank canvas and I just don't know what to do. And I don't have the talent, and I admit that, to do that sort of thing, to draw something out. My brother, on the other hand, he was an amazing artist. He drew all his life. He was also a great musician. He was the creative one in the family. I consider myself creative, but my brother was much more creative than I was. And he was much older than I am. And I remember when I was young, one day, my brother set up the easel in our backyard and he took out some watercolors. He used all sorts of medium, but he was using watercolors that day. And I watched him for probably an hour, just sitting next to him, not saying a word. And I watched him paint a landscape. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't looking at something and painting it. He was just doing this in his mind. He was doing a river scene with some trees and whatever. I don't remember the painting per se exactly, but I sat there and I watched him for about an hour paint this thing. And I was just amazed by what he was doing. And after about an hour or so, he pulled out the smallest brush he had, took some black paint, and he signed his name to the bottom corner of the painting. And I asked him, I said, how did you know that the painting was done? And he turned and looked at me and says, oh, it's not done. It'll never be done. It's just, I'm done with it. And that stuck with me afterwards. When I started going through design school, that message my brother told me stuck with me. When he said that no painting, no design, nothing you do creatively is never done. You just have to determine the time that you are done with it. Once he signs his name to something, then he won't go back and touch that painting again. If he doesn't sign his name, there's always the possibility he will go up and he will find flaw. He will find some area that he wants to improve on it. And this is the same for everybody. My brother was like this. The masters, if you go back and Monet and Rembrandts and all Picassos, I'm sure that those artists looked at what we consider their masterpieces, and they looked at them after they were done, and they could always find something they could have done better, something they could have added, something they could have changed. And that's because, as I said earlier, perfection is not attainable. The work is never done. A painting is never finished. There's always something else that can be done to it. It's just at some point, the artist or you, the designer, has to decide that you are done with it. And the same goes for when we're designing. When you're designing a logo for somebody or a website, there's always something more you can do. But at some point, you have to say, enough's enough. I'm done with it. It's as close to perfection as you want to go at this point. And the big thing is to remember, when you are designing this stuff, most of the time, you're not designing stuff for yourself. Designing stuff for yourself is a whole nother issue. I mean, we all know that we are our worst clients. You know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, that I don't have a website. Even though I preach that you do need a website, I've never had my own website. It's not that I haven't built websites for myself. It's just I've never been satisfied with the websites I've built to the point where I was willing to launch it. And that's because I am my worst client. And I'm sure you feel the same. It is extremely hard to design stuff for yourself. But the most of the stuff that you do design, whether it's a website, a logo, a t-shirt, whatever, it's not for yourself. It's for your client. Your client is the one that has to live with it. Your client is the one that has to use it. Once you're done designing it and you pass it on to the client, it is no longer your problem. You don't need to worry about it anymore. You move on to the next project. Yes, it may be something good and you can put it into your portfolio. But again, you're pretty well done with it. So your client is the one that needs to live with it. So you need to listen to the criticism your client gives you. When they tell you something, keep that in mind. It's not your design, it's their design. You're just the tool that's creating it for them. Listen to what they have to say. Now, I'm not telling you to do everything they have to say. You need to impart your knowledge of design and your skills and explain things to them. I've had many clients come to me when I show them a design, whether it's a logo or whatever, and they will say, I'm not sure about this area, or I don't understand this area. But once I explain to them the reasoning behind it, and that's why you can't just say, here's your logo, what do you think? You need to present logos or designs to people, because once you explain it, I've had so many people go, I didn't quite get it, but now that you explain it, I love it and I don't want to change anything. But if you hadn't explained that to them, then they would have found fault with it. So you need to listen to the criticism they give you, because sometimes it is good, constructive criticism. Sometimes it's unhelpful. Sometimes the criticism will just be, I don't like it and I don't know why. But whatever the criticism, you need to find a way to work around it, to handle it. Sometimes, as I said, it could just be a matter of explaining yourself, using your knowledge to explain the design to the point where the client then sees how good it is and they decide to use it. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to give in and follow the criticism and make the changes, even if you think it's not the best design. Because in the end, if your client is happy with it, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you're not happy. I don't know any designer who's never been through the situation. And if you've never been through this situation, my hat's off to you, because so many people have experienced this, where you give multiple designs to a client. You have the one design, let's call it design A, that you think is the absolute best design you have ever done. Then you have design B. That is a really good design. You're really proud of it, but it's not quite at the same level as A that, oh, wow, I can't wait for the client to see that one. And then you do design C because you told the client you're going to give them 3 designs. So you just do something, and C is like, it's just a basic design. It's no big deal, but it doesn't really matter about that one because A is the pinnacle. It is the most amazing thing. I mean, that's the only design you need in your portfolio, and everybody's going to want to hire you. It is that good. And then you show them to the clients, and the client comes back and says, I love design C. They don't see the benefit of A that you saw. They don't see how good a design B is. There's something in C that they see and they like. And it's heartbreaking. And you want to go, no, you don't understand. Why did I even show you that one? you've got to remember that the design is for your client. It's not for you. And as I said earlier, design is subjective. Whatever you see as the best, somebody else might not care for it. Now, sometimes you could convince a client to go another way, but once they look at something, a design, and they say they like it, and that's the one, it's pretty hard to change their opinion, especially to go to something completely different. So I'm not going to get into the whole thing where what you should be doing is not providing them with that third design. But if you are somebody in your contract or you stated that I will provide you with 3, make sure they're 3 you're happy with, because Murphy's Law states that if you supply them with 2 good designs and a bad design just to get a third one out there, they're going to pick that third design. Now, this criticism is something not just on an individual project basis. Criticism is something you learn to improve yourself, and you learn with dealing with clients. After a while, you should start to know what your clients like and what your clients dislike. I've mentioned before how I have a client. I've been dealing with her for over 20 years. I've been designing things for her. And she works with multiple committees, multiple businesses. So it's not always one business. There's all sorts of stuff, all sorts of events, all sorts of, as I said, businesses, side gigs, all sorts of stuff that I've worked with her. And I've learned over the years that I cannot use the color green with her. It doesn't matter what the design is. If I use green, she will not accept it. And sometimes she doesn't even know. Like, it's not that, oh, no, there's green, I don't want it. She'll look at it and she just won't like it. And it's to the point where I will show her a mock-up. And if I'm using stock photography, like say I want a picture of a lady walking down the sidewalk holding a shopping bag. Well, if that lady is wearing a green dress, I will go in and I will change, even if this is an FPO only, for position only, a low res image that I downloaded from a site, just as a placeholder, I will go in and I will change the color of that dress. I will bring it into Photoshop, change the hue so it's either a blue dress or an orange dress or anything but green. Because I know that if I show the layout, even if that photo is a small part of the layout, the fact that the woman is wearing a green dress will throw my client off. She will look at it and she will go, there's something about this layout I don't like. And she might not actually pinpoint that it's that dress. But as I said, I've learned over the years that anything green will affect her judgment and she will be more critical of it. I remember a project that I did for her several years ago where it was part of a committee. She was the one ultimately deciding approving the project. But there was a committee that was working under her that I was dealing mostly with. And it was kind of a learning experience. She wanted them to learn some stuff. So she asked me if I was okay dealing with them instead of with her. But I knew she had final say. Well, the committee was coming up with some ideas. Then they wanted me to design something. And one of the ideas was they wanted a traffic light, a green go traffic light on the design, basically saying something like your path ahead is clear, move on. And I'm not going to go into the detail of the whole project, but that's what they wanted. Knowing my client, knowing who was going to make the ultimate decision, I switched that up on them. And instead of putting a green traffic light with go and a message saying your path is clear, move on, I switched it and I put a red traffic light, meaning stop. And I changed the message myself. I rewrote the wording that they had provided me so that it said something like, and I can't remember, I should have pulled it up, but I'm going to paraphrase here. The message was along the lines of, there will be obstacles in your way, but if you have patience and you wait, those obstacles will disappear. Meaning you have a red light telling you to stop. But if you wait long enough, that light will change to green and you will be able to move forward. Well, they thought, oh, this is neat. This is not what we asked for. But when I showed it to my client, she absolutely loved it. And one of the people in this committee mentioned to her that they really wanted the green light in there. And as soon as they said that, she said, I don't think that would have worked. Now, any other client, the green light would have worked. But to her, it wouldn't. The green would have thrown off the design for her. And that's the sort of thing. It's criticism. I've learned that from my client. because of over the years designing stuff that had green in it and realizing how it affects her. Now, this is an extreme. Chances are you're not going to have a client that has this effect, but it just goes to show that criticism will help you grow as a designer. And now I know, after 20 years of dealing with her, that I can't include green. I do it every once in a while just to bug her. I'll throw something in and I'll make like the entire background green. And it's a running joke we have now. I know she's going to throw it away or discard it completely as soon as she sees it. But I'll follow that up usually like a few minutes later with one that has a different color background. I just do it to bug her. We're got that sort of relationship where I don't mind sending her something as a joke and saying, here, it's an entirely green flyer. And again, it comes from handling the criticism that was given to me near the beginning of our relationship and growing as a designer because of it and finding alternatives. When I was presented with that idea to use a green traffic light, I instead chose a red traffic light. And that sort of knowledge and skill that you learn from criticism can be applied to a whole bunch of different clients. So when a client tells you to do something or they see something they don't like and they criticize it, then you can take that idea, that criticism, and go a different direction and create something they do like. Because ultimately, the client has to like the design. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. It's the client that needs to like it. So if you have not gone to school and haven't gone through the whole class getting up and criticizing your work and trying to learn from that and not getting frustrated or angry when somebody says something and you disagree with it, if you have not had that experience and you are still fresh or new as a designer, I suggest you start posting your work in Facebook groups. There are groups out there specifically for this, for posting work and getting criticism. It is a great way to strengthen your skin, to see what other people are seeing, because everybody sees design differently. As I said, it's very subjective. Everybody sees the design differently. What one person thinks works really well, somebody else will not like. So learn. It's a lot better to do it in one of those communities and have designers point out things, point out areas that could be improved, point out areas that need to change, point out areas that work really well. And it'll help you grow as a designer so that when you do present something to a client and the client gives you criticism, you'll be able to handle it much better. Because no matter how good a designer you are, no matter how long you've been doing this, you will always receive criticism for your work. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. Now, I would love to hear how you deal with criticism. Did you have an experience in school like I did where you were criticized over and over and over in order to learn? Or did you have to learn on the fly by listening to clients and learning to bite your tongue whenever they start saying stuff that you disagree with? I would love to know how you first started dealing and how you deal with criticism now. Please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 86 and leave a comment for this episode. And now, this week's question of the week. This week's question comes in from Anthony. It says, I'm just starting off graphic and web design here in Kenya and have been thinking of doing this as a business. Most of my questions have been addressed in the podcast I've listened to, but there is one area on which I would like advice. What are the best terms of payment when doing graphic design work? What works for many service businesses over here is asking for a deposit and the rest paid after the work is delivered. What is your take on this and what has worked for you? Kind regards, Anthony. Well, Anthony, like you said, a good practice is to ask for money up front and then ask for the final payment once the job is complete. Now, in some cases, like I'll just talk for myself. I mean, there are so many different designers. If you post this question in a Facebook group, you'll get so many different answers. Some designers like to ask for payments on a regular basis throughout a project. So they'll ask for maybe 20% up front and then 20% after the first proofs and then 20% after the revised proofs and then another 20% after like final things and then the balance upon delivery. And some people, that's the way they do it. They swear by that. I don't particularly like that. I think it creates more business and bookkeeping work that you don't need, what I like to do is on any new client that I get, I either ask for 50% of the project upfront if we have a fixed price. And if it's a job that I'm billing by the hour, I will bill them for a percentage of the hours. So if I look at the job and I think it's a job that's going to take me 4 hours, I'll ask for 2 hours of payment up front. If it's a job that's going to take me 10 hours, I'll ask for 5 hours up front. In my case, I ask for 50% up front and then ask for the balance 15 days after the project is done. So when the project is done, I send an invoice payable within 15 days. And that's worked for me. But that's mostly for print design. For web design, the way I do it is 50% up front and then 50% or the balance upon launch of the website. So I usually design the website on my own server. I don't like working on a client's server. I'll design it on my server so the client can go in and look at everything. And once the client approves it and it's done, then I will say, okay, I require the balance of payment in order for me to move it from my server to your server. And it works really well with websites because it's almost like you're holding the website ransom or hostage until you get payment. And I've never had an issue. Payment up front is usually the one that takes a little bit longer. And I'll often tell somebody that I won't start on it until I receive that 50%. And sometimes it'll take a few weeks before I get that payment. And they'll say, well, can you start it beforehand? And I'll say, no, my policy is I schedule the website to start working on it once I have the deposit. And until I have that deposit, I will not schedule my time to work on your website. So if I tell them that, then often I will get the money in a timely manner. And then, as I said, at the end, once they approve the website, I say, okay, I require the balance of the payment. Once I receive the balance, then I transfer the website over. And most of them will end up paying me right that day. They'll either give me a transfer or send the money one way or the other so I get it that day because they want the website as soon as possible. There are some that'll say, I'll mail you a check and is that okay? And depending on the client, if it's an existing client, I'll take that. If they say I will mail the check out today, I'll take them at face value and I will put their website up on their server so that it is live, knowing that in good faith, the money is on its way. But a new client I've never dealt with, the website doesn't go up until I've been paid in full. Now, with existing clients that I've been dealing with for a long time, like I mentioned that lady, I've been designing stuff for 20 plus years for her. That I don't ask for anything up front. When she contacts me for a project, I know she's good for the money. I will do the job and then invoice her, and then she pays me within a couple of weeks. And I'm okay with that because that's the sort of relationship we've built. I have other clients that I know just the way that it is more corporate clients that I'm not going to get paid for 60, 90, sometimes 120 days. And it's annoying, but I've come to expect that. So there's certain clients that I'll do the work, I'll invoice them, and I know that it might be 3 months before I see the check. But again, it's the relationship. I've been dealing with these clients for years. I know what to expect. So I don't work on stuff thinking, oh, I'm going to get all this money and I'll be paid right away. No, that money will come. And they've never not paid, but it's farther down the road. Now, some people don't like dealing with that, but that's just the way this client works. And if I wasn't willing to accept that, they would find another designer. So you've got to compromise. You got to work around things. But best practice is upon signing of the contract, and you should be using a contract for your work. Upon signing a contract, you get 50% or at least a deposit. It doesn't have to be 50%, but you get a deposit to secure the work. And that's basically to tell the client that, yes, I will do the work for you. You've secured my skills and my time for me to do your work. And then the balance, either upon completion, if it's a printed job and I'm print brokering, it's payment upon delivery. Depending on the size of the print job. If it's a really big print job, like a $50,000 print job, I will actually ask for payment before. I'm not going to sit on $50,000 waiting for my clients to pay me. I will ask for the payment before it goes to the printer. I'll tell them, I says, here's the quote. We're going to get it printed. I require payment before I send the files off. And if there's a deadline or a time frame for these things to be printed, they better hurry up and get me that money because I'm not sending files out to a printer until I have that money in hand. Because then I'm going to have to turn around and pay the printer. And I don't want to be stuck with a bill of $50,000 and then I have to wait 2 months for my client to pay me. Now, the other thing you can do, Anthony, is add an interest to your invoice. So if you do offer payment terms, like you'll send an invoice at the end and they have to pay within 2 weeks or 30 days, you can charge interest. I have never charged interest myself. It's on my invoice that if you don't pay within 15 days, that I can charge, I forget, it's 2% or 3%. I'd forget what is on there. It's on my invoice. It's been on my invoice since I started work, but I have never, ever charged a client interest. But that's just me. And some people do. As soon as they go over, they start charging interest. And that's your prerogative. You are entitled to do that. I just personally, I've never done that. And you've asked how I do it. I've never charged interest to a client, even though it does state on my invoice that I will. But I've also never had clients that I really had to hunt after. Most of them, you know, after a couple of calls and that, they'll end up paying and I don't have to worry about it too much. So as I said at the beginning, there are many different ways. If you post this question in any sort of group where designers are, you will get a whole bunch of different answers, a whole bunch of different ideas, a whole bunch of different methods that designers use. And there are no real right or wrong ways. It's whatever way you decide to work, you need to stick with it and hold to it with your clients. Don't tell your clients that you require payment before a website goes live and then put the website live before the payment comes. You're just contradicting what you're saying. And that can actually hurt your relationship with the client if you tell them that you're going to do one thing and then you don't follow through with it. So anyways, I hope that answers your question. As I said, that's just my perspective. There are many others out there that you could listen to or get advice from as well. But whatever way you decide to do it yourself is probably going to be the best way for you. So thank you very much for that question, Anthony. And if you have a question that you would like me to answer on a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and submit your question. So that's it for this week's podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, and if you enjoy the podcast as a whole, you can support Resourceful Designer by becoming a Patreon. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/Patreon, that's Patreon, and for as little as $1 a month, you can help support the podcast. I want to thank Lena, Tracy, Carmilla, Yannick, Stephen, Lisa, and Wayne for being supporters of Resourceful Designer. Your contributions help to fund the back end of this podcast, the hosting and some of the services I use, all in relation to this podcast. So thank you very much for your support. And if you would like to support the podcast, as I said, for as little as $1 per month, you can do so by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/Patreon. Now, before I sign off, I do have another iTunes review I'd like to share with you. And this one comes in from Anthony from Kenya, which just by coincidence happens to be, I believe, the same person who I just answered a question from. And Anthony wrote, "Totally love this podcast. It has become invaluable for me. Mark is really practical and he fills up all that he says with real world examples. This has helped me to chart my way to moving from being employed to working for myself. Thanks, Mark, for all the work you're doing." Well, thank you very much for that kind 5-star review. Now, if you would like to leave a review for the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, which will redirect you to the page in iTunes Store where you can leave a review for the podcast. And what reviews do is they help other graphic designers when they discover this podcast, and maybe they don't know what it is. They will discover this podcast and they can look at the reviews and see what other designers have said about it. And it helps them with their decision on whether or not they want to press play and hear what I have to say. So thank you to Anthony and everybody else who has left a review for Resourceful Designer. And it doesn't matter where in the world you are. Anthony's from Kenya, and I still get the review. I've got a handy service called My Podcast Reviews that will let me know when anybody leaves a review in any iTunes store around the world, because there are over 150 different iTunes stores. So thank you to everyone who has ever reviewed the podcast. So that's it for this week's episode. Just a quick reminder about this week's resource, which is Backblaze, the easiest way, in my opinion, to back up your computer and protect yourself from natural disaster, theft, hard drive crashes, whatever. It's the easiest way because you set it up and forget it. And specifically, if you are currently using CrashPlan, you do need to find another alternative because they have announced that they will no longer be providing consumer backup service. So if you are on CrashPlan, Backblaze might be a perfect option for you. And you can get that through my affiliate link by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/backblaze. So that's it for me and another episode of Resourceful Designer. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business, and as always, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.